Welcome, everybody. So glad to see you here. My name is Dory Shack, and I'm an alumna of UC Santa Cruz, and Dr. Isbister here was my teacher at one time. So I just wonder how it feels to be on campus for you. I'm so happy to see so many people joining us to relive a lecture in a classroom. For those of you who are staying in the dorms, isn't it incredible to sleep under the redwoods that we once called home? Fortunately for you, today's class does not include midterms, narrative evaluations, or, thank goodness, grades. It is simply about learning and gaining knowledge. My name is Dory Shack. I'm an alumna of UCSC, having graduated in 1977 with a degree in psychology. I was drawn to this campus not only because of its outstanding curriculum, but also its unique and innovative narrative evaluation system. For those few of you who may not know about it, professors evaluated students not with letters A through F, but with written descriptions of each student's academic strengths and weaknesses and what they had learned. From my first day at UCSC in 1973, living in a dorm at Merrill College, it was a blast. I fondly remember taking classes like Social Change in the Third World, Abnormal Psychology, and American Power Structures. And I remember graduating from UCSC. A year later, I became a member of the university's staff. I worked there for 29 years. I see one of my colleagues right there. And I was first worked at the cooperative education program, and later at financial aid, and finally at off-campus housing. UCSC is always close to my heart. My husband and I, both educated here, were married at Merrill College in 1999. We were delighted by the beautiful outdoor location made available to us by John Isbister, who, as Merrill College provost at the time, facilitated our wedding venue. Thank you, John. Looking ahead, I'm delighted to welcome Professor Isbister for today's talk. If memory serves, he began his tenure at UCSC's economics department in 1968.
That's right.
And taught there for just shy of 40 years. His tenure at UCSC came to a close in 2006, and John now teaches at the University of Toronto.
Close, not quite, but good enough.
Close enough. As many of you may already know, Professor Isbister is a renowned economist and professor known for his expertise in economic development and social policy. With a focus on the impact of globalization and social justice, he has contributed significantly to understanding economic inequality and the role of the welfare system. His scholarly work includes exploring the dynamics of capitalism and its societal implications, and he has been influential in shaping discussions around economic reform and social equity. Please join me in giving a warm welcome to Professor Emeritus John Isbister.
So this is on? Yes, it's on. Well, thank you, Dory. Dory and I are old friends. So when she arrived here as a first-year student at Merrill College, I wasn't provost of Merrill then, but I was teaching in the core course, and she was in my core course section, her first quarter. And we met down in my living room. I lived in an old Victorian down on Walnut Avenue, and the students all took the bus down, 2 mornings a week, and then we sat in my living room. And I remember that very fondly, but I particularly remember, I was telling her this morning, I can't recall any of the other students, but but I recall Dory, and we've stayed good friends ever since. So thank you. Um, now let me just check something out here. Okay. Welcome. And this, I'll tell you, well, let me move on. I'll start with this way. At my age, I'm an old man, and my village is slowly diminishing. My UCSC village, my cohort, they're dropping off. I wanted to say slowly, but sometimes it seems faster rather than slow. So as we go on this morning, I will mention various people, good friends of mine, who are no longer with us. I'm going to start with Peter Euban. I expect a lot of you remember Peter Euban. He was a professor of political theory, a great scholar and a great teacher. And he overlapped my time here almost exactly. He came a year before I did. He was a founding fellow of Crown College. Crown was College 3. I was a founding fellow of Merrill College. Merrill was College 4. For the first 5 years of UCSC, there was a new college each year, colleges 1, 2, 3, 4, 5. And then it took a little while for College 6. That's this college, Kresge. Well, anyway, when Peter left in 2002, he went to Duke. His last course, the last lecture of his last course, he framed as a farewell lecture, which unfortunately I didn't. A lot of people went to it, not just the students, and I didn't. But I heard that it was a wonderful lecture, and unfortunately, so I left 4 years later, and unfortunately, I didn't have the wit to do the same thing. I should have. So fast forward to this event, Return to the Redwoods. They asked me if I would. Kathy Foley gave a lecture last year at this event, which I went to and loved. It was about puppetry, and so they asked me if I would fill the same slot this year, and I said sure, I'd be happy to. Could I do it in the form of a farewell lecture? Late, but a farewell lecture. And they said sure. And then I said, well, could I invite some friends? And they said sure, why not? So some of you were Return to the Redwoods alumni, but some of you were my old friends from UCSC. There's a picture of Peter Euban. He died in 2018. So after a few false starts about what this farewell lecture was going to be about, and a kind of kick in the pants from my wife Roz, who's here, my first idea, she said it wouldn't do at all, and so so I went to my second idea, or third. And so the topic is what I learned during almost 4 decades at UCSC. And of course, I learned a lot. And I hope I learned more than I can fit into one short lecture, but I'll cover some highlights. And I'll be sure to leave some time for conversation. Oh, I should say, after this event, I had told some people that we would go to Rachel Carson College for lunch. Well, it turns out that Rachel Carson Dining Hall closes too early. So if you want to have lunch and just talk afterwards, we can go up to John Lewis College. And what I'm told is that you can drive up there, and I'm told that the parking is free. So I want to start with, so a lot of my friends have died, and many of them, and to sort of represent all of them, I want to just say a word about two, the two most recent, who just died this summer. And I'll say a word about them, and I don't mean to downplay the others who died a little earlier, but just to kind of represent them. But my very close friend Jack Michelson died just a couple of weeks ago. He was a professor of economics. Some of you may remember him. He was a founding fellow of Cowell College, which really means something because Cowell College was the first college, College One. So he was one of the first faculty members on this campus before there were any buildings built. You know, the mythical trailers down in the East Field House. He was a fine economist and a wonderful teacher, and a very close. He and his wife Hyla, who also died this year a little bit earlier, were very close friends of mine, and in particular helpful when times were rough for me, when I was down, and I needed somebody to talk to, you know, to be sympathetic, just to listen. And there was Jack. Jack was always there. And so I miss him very much. He lived a wonderful life. He was 93 when he died. So there's a picture of Jack. And the second person I want to remember right now is Ringo Hallinan. There's a picture of Ringo is in the middle, and I'm on the right. And on the left is a man named Don Francis, who's one of the world's leading epidemiologists. And that picture was taken, you can see we've been backpacking. It's in Tuolumne Meadows in Yosemite, and it's at the end of a week-long hike up the Grand Canyon of the Tuolumne. And it's a hike that Ringo and I did often. I mean, at least 6 times, maybe more. And we always went with other people. And one of the people we went with one summer was Andy Zaz, who's over here, and lots of other people. It was sort of a tradition that we had to do this hike. Ringo and my wife Roz were the journalism program at. I mean, the two of them were the journalism program at UCSC for many years. Ringo was also the provost of this college. Kresge College. Anyway, I was trying to think of a way of describing Ringo Hallinan. His real name was Con Hallinan. I was trying to think of a way of describing him, and I thought, well, I'll call him unique. And then I thought, oh, that's silly. I mean, every one of us is unique. That doesn't say anything. And then I was thinking, well, you know, I expect most of you have read Orwell's Animal Farm, right? And in Animal Farm, one of the very memorable phrases in Animal Farm is that all animals are equal, but some are more equal than others. And so that's kind of the way I think about Ringo. Every one of us is unique, but some of us are more unique than others. And there will never be another Ringo Hallinan. I think those of you who had any connection with him at all will immediately grasp what I'm trying to get a hold of imperfectly. So he died in, he had cancer. He died in late June. Okay, but that's not what this lecture is about. This lecture is about what I learned at UCSC. And I'm thinking of it as a kind of meandering train ride through my memories of this institution. Not a straight line at all, kind of meandering. And so it needs a map. So here's the map. There are stations, train stops on different topics. And I've got slides on all of these. I may not get to all of them because I don't want to keep us too long. And I certainly want to leave time for conversation. But here are the stops. How did I get here? Number 2, Merrill College. Number 3, how I became a writer. Number 4, ideas. Number 5, ideas and economics. 6, ethnicity and immigration. 7, ethics. 8, politics and the credit union. Number 9, which we probably won't get to, what is education for? And then number 10 is for you. That's the map. And so you'll have some idea of where we are. So how did it start? Well, I didn't intend to be here. I didn't. It's my cane. That's fine. You can just leave it there. I never intended to be an academic. When I was an undergraduate, I went to Africa, and I loved being in Africa. And I thought I want to have a career dealing with Africa, like foreign aid or international development or something like that. And I knew that I needed to go to graduate school if I was going to have such a career. So I picked the graduate program. It was at Princeton, which featured the world's leading authority on economic development, Sir W. Arthur Lewis. He was from the Caribbean. He's died now. He was from the Caribbean, from the small island nation of St. Lucia. And so I did that program. And on finishing the program, I could have done just what I intended to do. I mean, I could have gone to the World Bank or the UN or something like that. But I decided to start with an academic career. But I was only going to start with an academic job. So my idea was, I'll go to a university, I'll build up my confidence in speaking and teaching, and I'll write a few articles, and I'll get tenure. I mean, I'll get established as an economist, and then I'll go into practical work. That was my idea. And so that's what I thought I was doing. Except once I got to the university, I loved it so much that I never left. There's a picture of Arthur Lewis. He was a stern man, and I mean brilliant, and it was a great privilege to sort of learn at in his seminar. He didn't suffer fools gladly, although in my case he was willing to make an exception. So anyway, the second stop on this journey is Merrill College. So I came to a university. It was all sort of random. There's a kind of established routine for people with new PhDs getting jobs in economics, and you're almost like it's almost like a billiards table. You're like a ball on that billiards table, and there are these cues pushing you around, and you'll end up in some pocket, and you have some agency over what pocket you're going to end up in, but not total agency. So, I mean, I had several offers, and I had to make some choices, but somehow or other, I found myself accepting a job at Santa Cruz. But even then, I had no idea what I was getting into, because I thought I was accepting a job in an economics department. And in fact, I was. There was an economics. They weren't called departments in those days. They were called boards of studies. But really what I was doing was I was accepting a job in an interdisciplinary college, which didn't exist. It was the first year of this college, College 4. And so these colleges, Dean McHenry and Clark Kerr had the idea that these colleges would have, that they would be the center of the intellectual activity in this new university, and they would each have a theme. And we blew through the first 3 themes pretty easily: humanities, social sciences, natural sciences, and what were they going to do for the 4th college? And McHenry hired, after some false starts, hired an economist, provost named Phil Bell, and Phil said he would take on the job as long as it would be international, and as long as what we meant by international was the developing world or North-South relations. Phil wasn't interested in East-West Cold War stuff. So McHenry said fine. And so I arrived here and found a group of colleagues who became my closest friends over the next, from then till now. Among them, and there were many more, but among them were Wally Goldfrank in sociology. His wife, he's died, but his wife Lois is here this morning. Stu Schlegel and Nancy Tanner in anthropology. They've both died. Terry Burke and David Sweet in history have not died, and they're here this. An exception to the rule. And they're actually here this morning. DeLee Lance in psychology. John Jordan, who in literature, who wanted to come, but he can't come. And Michael Cowan, the same. I don't think he's here, is he? No. He wanted to come too, but he's got health problems and couldn't come. John Markham, now not all of these people were here in 1968. So these are people who came, in the first few years. John Markham in politics. Noel King in religious studies. Now, speaking of people who are unique but more unique than others, I'm sure many of you remember Noel King. Nick Royal in field studies. And so there we were. We had to put together a college. And we got no help. No guidance. The chancellor, McHenry, certainly didn't give us any guidance. And the provost, Phil Bell, did his best, but really he was not equipped to give us much guidance. I can say that he's gone now too. But you see, the idea was that the intellectual life of the university was to be in the colleges. Okay, well then what was it going to be? And we started from zero. And well, the first three colleges had a core course. So we thought, well, okay, we'll have a core course. We don't know what's going to be in this core course, but we'll have a core course. Cowell and Crown had a 1/4 core course. Stevenson had a 3/4 core course. So we said, oh, why not? We'll have a 6/4 core course. And that's the way we started off in the first year. We had a core course every quarter for the first 3 quarters. And one on, I forget, Latin America, the Middle East. I'm not sure what they all were, Africa. Don't worry about that. We'll just leave it there. And then we realized we couldn't do that. It was impossible. They were very scratchy, those core courses, and there was no way we were going to be able to do 6 of them. So in the second year, we boiled it down to just 1 course, like all the colleges except Stevenson. But it was still very iffy, that 1/4 core course. We had to work for years to make that an acceptable course, but we did. Now here are pictures of some of those old timers. Now, not from 1968. In fact, Wally Goldfrank, Terry Burke, who's here, John Jordan, who wanted to be here, and Nick Royal, who's off in a vacation someplace in the East. You've never seen these guys before with ties, right? It's not their natural habitat. But I know exactly when this picture was taken. It was taken, the date is June 19th, 1987. And it was in the backyard of the Merrill Provost's house. And it's not just Dory who got married there. I got married there. Roz and I, we got married in the church downtown, but we had the reception there, and that's a picture of these guys at our wedding reception. So what's that, like 19 years after the college was? So they're getting into middle age there. Here are some other pictures of people who were there at the beginning. Stuart Schlegel, an anthropologist, a very close friend of mine, and he died, 5 years ago or something like that. He was a priest. He was an Episcopalian priest as well as an anthropologist, and he had a very, very difficult life, but soldiered through it with great optimism and great influence on his both colleagues and students. David Sweet, who came maybe in the third year of Merrill College, and David is here. There's David over there. Looks just the same as he did then. There's Michael Callan, who couldn't make it this morning, and John Markham, who became provost of Merrill College after Phil Bell left, and then became vice chancellor, and then director of the Education Abroad program for UC. Now, it really mattered that this college was starting in the 1960s. Not just the college, Merrill College, but the university began in the 1960s. We were all products of the 1960s. Now, there were different kinds of products of the 1960s. There were flower children and hippies and all that. We were not flower children or hippies. Some of us were quite serious radicals. Not me. I was, a good term for me was the representative of the radical middle. And where that came from, where that phrase came from, when I was an undergraduate in Queen's University in Canada, I was involved in student politics. And there was a columnist in the campus newspaper who devoted a short paragraph to me and called me the representative of the radical middle. And it was not a compliment. But the more I thought about it, the more I thought, well, it's probably fairly accurate, and probably stayed fairly accurate from that day to this. So it was the 1960s, and you may remember Grace Slick of Jefferson Airplane, who famously said that if you remember the 60s, you weren't there, and she was talking about drugs. And I remember the 60s, and I didn't do drugs, as far as I can recall. But it was a tumultuous time. And the sorts of things that we argued about and tried to figure out they wouldn't make any sense today. For example, when we had endless meetings trying to figure out what our college would be. And here was a serious question that we argued about, sometimes, at meetings late into the night. Should our college be a revolutionary cell in the struggle against the Vietnam War and against capitalism and for civil rights, or should we be a group of dispassionate and objective scholars? Now, you wouldn't have that discussion today, right? If you were starting a new college. I mean, that's a question that came out of the 60s, and you had to be there. The students, those original students, they were students of the 60s, in dress and behavior and attitude. And it's not that they were hostile to us, to the faculty. No, they weren't hostile at all, but they accorded us no deference whatsoever. Just as a small example, they called us all by our first names. I would never have dreamed of calling my professors at Queen's or at Princeton by their first name. I mean, it just would have been impossible. In some cases, I don't think they knew my last name. It was all first name. Now, this was kind of hidden to us at the time, but most of them were Anglos, not all of them. Some were students of color who had a pretty difficult time in this environment. And most of them came from upper middle class families. And that also was somewhat hidden to us. Now, not all of them, of course. There were some working class Anglo students, one of whom I didn't actually know at the time, but 18 years later, she had the questionable judgment to marry me, and then the even more questionable judgment to stick with me all these years, and here she is. But it was mostly upper middle class Anglo students. So one of the things I learned immediately from my new colleagues in Merrill College was that my training, and I use that word advisedly rather than education, my training in economics, although it was at one of the world's top graduate schools, had been like attending a trade school. I was learning the craft of economics. Modern economics embodies philosophical and value positions, but they're just assumed. They're not investigated. They're not examined. They're not criticized. They're not debated. They're just taken for granted. But all my new friends came from programs that critically assessed the contradictory assumptions in their fields. And I was startled. And I could see immediately how important that was and how I was way behind in terms of that kind of thinking. I was at sea. It was hard for me to even enter into those discussions. In other words, although I didn't choose it specifically, Merrill College plunged me into an intellectual world that was unfamiliar, conflictual, challenging, and in a way I wasn't sure I belonged. One of the ways that we sort of built on all this, and this was Terry Burke's initiative, we had a seminar that we called the Seminar on Comparative History, and it wasn't just Merrill. It was the center of it was Merrill faculty, but there were people from other faculty members from other colleges too, and we met once every 2 weeks, and one of us would prepare a paper. I mean, it was a paper on some project, some research project they were working on, and would Xerox off. This was pre-computers. Would Xerox off the paper and send it out to us, and we would meet in somebody's living room and talk about it for 2 hours. We met in different living rooms, but I think half of the time it was in Wally and Lois's living room. And that was, I would say that was the most valuable part of my education, more valuable than my undergraduate or my graduate education. The French have a word, formation, which you could translate into English as formation, but it's education in the broadest sense. And my education in the broadest sense came partly from just being in the environment of my college, but more specifically from week after week after week in this seminar on comparative history. You know how it ended? We got a grant. We did. We had some expenses. We had to Xerox off these papers. So somebody had the bright idea. We'll get a grant to pay for the Xeroxing, not for the beer. You couldn't charge the beer against the grant, and that was the end of it. We were now an official program of UCSC, and within about a year it was over. Now later I became the provost of Merrill, a job which I had for 15 years, and I think that's still a record. You know, Elizabeth. I think I saw Elizabeth come in. Yeah. Did you make 15 years?
11.
Just 11. Okay. So I think that's still a record. It'll be broken sometime. And I loved that job. There were lots of challenges, particularly the challenge of leading a multicultural community. And I was blessed by having an exceptional staff. Now, I just heard from Cecil Saunders, who was the college administrative officer for part of that time, and wanted to be here, but she got sick this morning. And an exceptional group of core course lecturers. So that's the second stop. That was a little longer than the first stop, I'm sorry. third stop on this journey, how I became a writer. Now, while I was a fellow of Merrill College, of course, I was also a member of a good economics department. I did not really interact intellectually with most of the economists, and two of the exceptions were Jack Michelson, I just showed you his picture, and Alan Richards, who's here someplace. There, somewhere is Alan. If I had joined the economics department of a more orthodox university, I think I would have continued to develop my skills in economic theory, econometrics. I mean, I would have become a conventional economist. But by about 1980, I couldn't do it anymore. Economics became a kind of subfield of applied mathematics, and I couldn't do that. And furthermore, I didn't want to do it. I kind of lost interest in it. Now, there's a chicken and egg problem there, right? I mean, losing interest in it and not being able to do it. I'm not sure which came first. But there I was. I was really not a card-carrying member of the economics profession anymore. And so my intellectual journey there was actually different from that of most of my friends, because I was no longer a research economist, and I hadn't yet found through the college or any other way a way to find something to substitute. And see, faculty members are always saying, and they usually mean it, that they have no time. They're completely out of time. There are too many demands on them. They're writing and they're doing research and they're teaching and they're going to meetings, and there's not enough time in the day. I had plenty of time in the day. I used to leave the office at 2 o'clock in the afternoon with nothing more to do, and because I just hadn't found my way. So what rescued me was my marriage to Roz. So Roz is a writer and a teacher of writing, and Roz writes all the time in many genres, and Roz's writing is penetrating, stimulating, interesting, and I knew I couldn't match it. I couldn't be a writer like her. But I thought, just watching her write continuously, I thought, well, maybe I could write something worth reading. And then maybe she could help me. So I said to myself, I'm going to write a book. And okay, that's a start. But then, you see, every book you've ever read was about something, right? It had a topic. Fiction or nonfiction. And so what's my topic going to be? I didn't know what my topic was going to be. So that was a start, but I still had a ways to go. And so I did write a book. And it's called Promises Not Kept, The Betrayal of Social Change in the Third World. And that's where I came back to the college. I was the provost. I was in charge of the core course. Our readings were not textbooks. They were village studies, or they were novels. But we needed one book to sort of set the overall context. And I thought, well, it's going to be easy. There must be lots of good books like that. So I spent a while looking for that good book. I couldn't find it. Maybe it exists, but I couldn't find it. So I wrote it. And it was intended as a book for Merrill freshmen to open up the world to them. And it worked. In fact, it eventually went through 7 editions, if you can believe it. And I still hear from people for whom it made a difference. Just a couple of years ago, I met a nurse in Toronto. She was American, and she had been in the Peace Corps in India. And she saw my name and said, "Oh my goodness, it was that book that made her understand what she was doing in the Peace Corps in India." And I thought, "Oh my goodness." So that was my first book. Through the college, you see, and this differentiates me from almost all my colleagues. through the college, I found what to do as an academic. So that's not what McHenry and Kerr had thought was going to happen at UCSC. They thought that the faculty would maintain their disciplinary focus as scholars, but would interact in thematic colleges. But what actually happened at UCSC was that after about 2 decades, the departmental magnets proved more powerful, and the faculty reaggregated. Instead of being spread evenly throughout all the colleges, different departments, like for example, almost all the economists came to Crown. They reaggregated in Crown, so they could walk down the hallway and have somebody to talk to about economics, right? Although the word that we sometimes used for it wasn't reaggregation, it was reaggravation. And so for most people, the college came to mean less and less intellectually. But for me, it was the opposite. The department came to mean less and less intellectually, and the college more. Fourth stop along this train ride, ideas. Here's an argument that we had at Merrill College, and not just Merrill. Hegel versus Marx. Hegelian idealism versus Marxist materialism. And there's a lot behind those ideas, but to make it overly simple, they were both proponents of what they call the dialectic, which means through conflict comes change. What conflict? Well, for Hegel, the conflict is the conflict of ideas creates the material world. And Marx famously said that he turned Hegel on his head. It was the conflict in the material world, the conflict of classes and technologies, that creates our ideas. So another way of putting it is, are our ideas autonomous? They just come from here, or are they derivative from the world we live in? And of course, there's doubtless truth in both versions. And both versions have become, they're still with us, that conversation, much more complex and sophisticated and hard to follow. A lot of the writing about this, I do my best, and I have a hard time keeping it straight. I expect some of you have heard this old story of what you get when you cross a deconstructionist with a mafioso. You get someone who makes you an offer you can't understand. Here's Hegel, here's Marx. John Maynard Keynes, who was the greatest, well, there's debate about this, but I have no doubt that he was the greatest economist of the 20th century, and his book, The General Theory of Employment, Interest, and Money, was the greatest economics book of the 20th century, has a statement about this which is easy to understand. He's on the Hegelian side, although I have no evidence that he thought of himself as Hegelian, but let me just read it. The ideas of economists and political philosophers, both when they are right and when they are wrong, are more powerful than is commonly understood. Indeed, the world is ruled by little else. Practical men who believe themselves to be quite exempt from any intellectual influences are usually the slaves of some defunct economist. Madmen in authority who hear voices in the air are distilling their frenzy from some academic scribbler of a few years back. I'm sure that the power of vested interests is vastly exaggerated compared with the gradual encroachment of ideas. I mean, that's one side of this argument, and it's stated very clearly that we begin with ideas, and the ideas create the world around us. There's a picture of Keynes. You can't tell from that picture, but he was a great tall man. When you see him standing beside his colleagues, he's a head taller. He's a Cambridge, Cambridge economist. All right, so, and I found myself more in that direction of thinking that the world is created by ideas rather than that ideas are created by the world. But at UCSC, it was just a conversation. One of the reasons I'm telling you about this is that at Toronto Metropolitan University, where I teach now, It's a whole program. We have a program called Arts and Contemporary Society. It's an interdisciplinary program, and it has core courses on the great ideas of the ancient world, great ideas of the medieval world, and so forth. There are about 4 of them. And the last one, which I teach, is on great ideas of the modern world. Well, what are those ideas? Well, the ideas I talk about are capitalism, revolution, evolution, democracy, reactions against the Enlightenment, and social movements like feminism, civil rights, indigenous rights, and so forth. And of course, there are other great ideas of the modern world. And that's one of the things I have fun with the students. What's your list of great ideas? You can think yourself. What's your list of great ideas of the modern world? But anyway, the way that fits into what I'm talking about now is that there's no way I would be able to teach such a course without my UCSC experience. 5th stop, ideas in economics. Well, I read you that little passage from Keynes. What Keynes could not have known when he wrote that paragraph was that it was his ideas that would actually rescue the capitalist system. I'll go through this train stop a little faster than the slides have. The capitalist system collapsed in the 1930s, the Great Depression, which was an economic catastrophe. And Marx had predicted exactly that advanced capitalism would collapse and it would morph into communism. And it didn't happen. Why didn't it happen? Well, the first reason it didn't happen was that the world went to war, and that, of course, put all the unemployed people back to work. The welfare state, pioneered by Franklin Roosevelt, well, then the question was, after the war is over, are we going to just revert back to the Great Depression? And we didn't, partly because the welfare state kicked in. The idea that governments have responsibility to take care of the least fortunate, that was not part of public discussion before the Great Depression. But it's just ordinary now, right? The idea that the government as the welfare state. But Keynesian economic policy. I mean, it's amazing. One of the reasons we're not going to have another Great Depression is that Keynes showed us why the Depression occurred and showed us very simple things that the government can do to pull us out of a recession. Monetary and fiscal policy, which were not part of the tools of governments before Keynes wrote. So it was Keynes's ideas had an incredible impact in rescuing, well, certainly rescuing the capitalist system from collapsing, and in a sense, rescuing the world from terrible poverty. And for better or for worse, rescuing the world from morphing into communism. We disagree about whether that's a good thing, but I'm going to go through some of these. Can ideas resolve the next crisis? Well, our next big crisis is not the Depression. We know how to deal with that. The next big crisis is ecological, right? Are we destroying the ecological basis which we need to exist? And so what we want is something called sustainable development, which I fear is an oxymoron. You know what an oxymoron is? It's a self-contradictory phrase like scenic Cleveland or jumbo shrimp or military intelligence or in my field, optimal unemployment. Well, sustainable development, I think, falls in that category. So I have an idea. I'm not Keynes, but I have an idea. I think that the only thing that's going to save us is a smaller population. In other words, if we had a smaller population, we could still grow in terms of output and income per person without growing the total. And that might be the only way to save our civilization. And we may be heading in that direction because birth rates are falling all over the world. And wherever they're falling, most people regard it as a disaster. The falling population is a disaster. I don't. I think it's maybe the only thing that will save us. Stop 6. Where am I? Okay. Ethnicity and immigration. Now, as I told you, our students in the early years were largely Anglo. You may remember these names, Herman Blake and Ralph Guzman. They fought an unending battle to diversify the students, faculty, and staff. They actually faced opposition. Not everybody agreed that we should, but they were undeterred. And they won. And one cause of the change at UCSC was simply demographic, as California became increasingly diverse. When I was here, Anglos became a minority of the California population, and among young people, sort of depending on how you define young people, maybe only 20% were Anglo. So of course, this is a public university, and the change in our university was rapid and dramatic. Asian, Black, Latino, Indigenous, as well as Anglo. And as that change was occurring, Oaks College became the center of Black student culture and Merrill of Latino student culture. And so the campus became immeasurably richer because of that. Herman and Ralph were right. We became richer, stronger, more democratic. And we were a microcosm of fast ethnic and social change in the country as a whole. But it wasn't easy. There were lots of conflicts involved in that fast change. And I'll just mention 2 of them. One of them I deeply, deeply regret. It began as a disagreement over food menus in Crown and Merrill. Some of you may remember that, the food fight. And it ended up actually damaging the careers of several people. I mean, it was a very damaging fight. And I was partly responsible. I didn't handle it. I was provost of Merrill. I didn't handle it as well as I should have. Now, I was not alone. There were a lot of people who didn't handle it very well. But it's not one of my, it's not, I was going to say it's not one of my proudest moments at all. It was a learning experience. For sure, it was a learning experience of how difficult it is to maneuver ethnic and cultural change, but it shouldn't have ended up hurting so many people so much. The other area of conflict is maybe a little lighter, is the conflict over music, which completely surprised me. I thought that music pulls people together. You know, the way music was used in the civil rights movement and the labor movement and the anti-war movement. People got together and they sang and they you know, it raised their hearts and pulled people together. Well, we had an event at Merrill every year in which the students repainted the moat. You know, there's a moat, big wall at Merrill, and so each year they would vote to keep a few of the old pictures, but whitewash the rest, and then have a weekend where they would repaint new pictures. It was quite, you know, it was in the spring, and it was a lovely occasion, except that we had music, and it really mattered who controlled the PA system. It really did, because the Black students wanted certain kind of music, and the Latino students wanted, you know, a different kind of music, and the Anglo students want, you know, and it wasn't just that they wanted their preferred music, they really didn't like the music of the other group. It sounded like noise to them. It was a difficult problem for us to navigate. I'm sorry that Cecil Saunders is not here. She was the college administrative officer, and she had to navigate all that and did a wonderful job of navigating it, but it was extremely difficult. And anyway, that's just one example, maybe a trivial, not so trivial, of how difficult it was to create a new multicultural society. Now, one of the causes of that rapid ethnic change, of course, was immigration. And at Princeton, I was actually trained in demography. As the population of an area changes, there's really three causes: births, deaths, and migration. And I was trained mostly in births and deaths, fertility and mortality. But now I decided to take an active interest in the third factor, which is migration. And I wrote a book, of course. It's called The Immigration Debate. And I developed several courses. And now in Toronto, I still teach those courses, a graduate course and an undergraduate course. And most of my students in all my courses, given where the university is, but certainly almost all my students in these immigration courses are immigrants or children of immigrants. And so I use the courses to get the students talking to each other. They learn from each other about their immigration experiences. And none of that would have happened without my years immersed in the ethnic cauldron of UCSC. I'll skip this one. I'm running out of time here. I'm watching my watch here. Ethics. All right. It was my great good fortune to audit Richard Wasserstrom's course on applied ethics. And then using a book of readings put together by Bill Shaw. Bill Shaw is the husband of Carolyn Martin Shaw, who you may know. They couldn't come today, but she is an emerita professor of anthropology. Wasserstrom and then I dealt seriously and even philosophically, you might say, which the idea was to take moral philosophy and apply it to practical current problems. What problems? Well, problems like the death penalty, abortion, foreign aid, war, animal rights, free speech. These are things we fight about, right? But how could we think about them philosophically? And so I was completely inspired by Wasserstrom to try to help my students read carefully, write carefully, and listen hard. And my goal for them was for them to develop the skills to participate actively in these public conversations and in all public conversations. So as I got deeper into moral philosophy, I realized that economics as a discipline has a pretty shallow relationship with philosophy. Economics is based firmly on a little part of moral philosophy called utilitarianism. There's positive utilitarianism, which is the assertion that economists know why people do what they do. They do what they do in order to maximize their utility, or to maximize their interests, to maximize their happiness. We know what people do. We don't have to investigate it, we just assume it. Normative utilitarianism is the idea that we should act so as to maximize everybody's interests, all right? Now, okay, I mean, those are interesting ideas. Economics doesn't investigate them, just asserts them. And moral philosophy is a great deal richer than this. So I started asking how to extend the ethical reach of economics. And so I wrote a book. I was getting into this by now. So I had a sabbatical year, and I wrote a book called Capitalism and Justice. And I revealed the title to a friend who said, must be a small book. And it is fairly brief. And I came around to this position. Usually when economists do interdisciplinary work, what they mean by that is they apply economic methodology, homo economicus, rational decision making, to areas that don't sound like they're economic, like the structure of the family, or international relations, or nuclear deterrence, or apply the economics methodology to those ideas. What I do is the complete opposite. I employ the methodology of other fields, and in this case, it's the methodology of moral philosophy, to strictly economic problems. And so now I teach 2 courses on ethics. I mean, I taught them both here, and I still do in Toronto. My adaptation of Wasserstrom's course on applied moral problems, and then a course on economic justice, following the outline of my book. And none of this would have been possible without the interdisciplinary focus of UCSC. I think this is going to be the last stop. Where are we? Yeah. Well, we'll see. I might do a little on the 9th. Politics, citizenship, and the public life. If there is one theme, if you had to just pick one theme that runs through all of my teaching and writing, it's the challenge of being a citizen. Now, the way I think about it is this. We all have private lives, right? Every one of us can't avoid having a private life. But you can avoid having a public life. You could choose to not be an active citizen. And what I try to preach, is not too strong a word, is that we should all have public lives. And the name for that is politics. And that's a word that a lot of people find distasteful. I mean, you ask the average student, what do you think about politics? And what they think is sleaze. They really, it's nothing that a serious person would be involved in. But I think that's wrong. I've pushed and prodded my students, both through teaching and through writing, to engage in politics, to have a public life. Politics, I think, is when you join with other people to affect social change. It doesn't have to be electoral politics, but when you join with other people to affect social change, in other words, to bring about something that's important for everybody, not just your own self-interest. You're doing politics. I learned a lot about politics from people at UCSC, and here are just a few of them. Peter Euban, Jack Shar, and Sheldon Wolin, all of whom have died now, but they were the powerful center of political theory at UCSC. They inspired all sorts of people here. Mike Rotkin, who's here, David Sweet, who's here, and many others who showed me what it means to have a constructive public life, a life devoted to politics. There's a picture of Mike. It's a little fuzzy, but if you want a less fuzzy picture, he's sitting in the front row here. So that raises the question, how have I internalized that? How have I done politics? Well, I actually think of teaching and writing as a political contribution. I mean, I've done none of this alone. And all of it I've done for the purpose of helping create a better world. So that's politics. Creating a new university and a new college in that university. I mean, that's an opportunity that is not given to many academics. They just join, you join the faculty at Berkeley, and Berkeley's been there for 150 years, and you just fit in someplace. But when we were starting off here, we were creating something new, and it was political. I took part in the civil rights movement and the anti-Vietnam War movement, now not as a leader. I was a foot soldier, but all of these movements need foot soldiers, right? One political movement that I was more of a leader in was a local movement for prison and jail reform. Mike was part of that. Mike Rotkin was part of that. I worked often for bond issues for public education. Of course, I worked supporting candidates for public office. Candidates like Mike. And voting. Now, voting just seems silly. I mean, it seems like ordinary. Of course, everybody votes. You can't claim any credit for voting. But it used to drive me crazy how many of my students just couldn't get around to voting. I mean, we would talk about what the issues were in class, and then the day after I would say, well, did you vote? Well, no, didn't vote. Well, why didn't you vote? Well, you know, I was living at Merrill, and the precinct was over at Porter, and I just couldn't. And I just couldn't make it. And I would say, do you realize how many hundreds of thousands of people, how many millions of people have sacrificed their lives so that you could vote, so that you could live in a democracy where the minimum obligation is just to vote? I'm not telling you how to vote, but just to vote. And we're in danger of losing it, right? I mean, we're in danger of losing democracy right now. Just voting. We're in danger of losing the vote. And so just even that is an important political action. And then I want to say a word about, I'm getting towards the end here, I want to say a word about the Santa Cruz Community Credit Union, which was my most consistent political action. And it didn't really, well, it came out of UCSC in the sense that all of the people involved, almost all of the people involved in the credit union had been connected to UCSC. I was deeply involved in that credit union. What is it? It's a cooperative institution, financial institution devoted to the needs of low and moderate income people in our community. And I've got some of my friends from the credit union are here today. Actually, they're not. I've just heard over the last few days, you know, people got sick and one thing and another. And they're probably members of the credit union here. I joined the credit union in its second year, 1978, when it had assets of $300,000. For a financial institution, you know, that's nothing. Now it has 200 million, which is still very small for a financial institution, but it's big enough to make a major impact on the lives of many low-income people. It's a financial institution devoted to the financial needs of low-income people. And I don't claim any credit for, I mean, I was on the board of directors and president for many years, and I don't claim credit for any particular achievement of the credit union because they were all joint achievements. They were politics. And of course, I wrote a book about it. The book is called Thin Cats, The Community Development Credit Union Movement in the United States. That didn't get a lot of applause, that title, Thin Cats, but I thought it was pretty good. Here are some people from the credit union. That's me a long time ago. That's 1980. And on one side is Karen Zell, and on the other side is Tinka Gordon, and they were the co-managers of the credit union in its early days. Tinka died about 10 years ago, and she was a UCSC alumna and was in Jack Michelson's core course section at Cal. And then both of these women expected to be here today and couldn't be. Ginger McNally and Mary Bennett. This is a much more recent picture. Ginger was the manager, the CEO of the credit union, and Mary was the president. And so these were among the people that I worked with. We worked jointly. And these were among the people that I worked with. You know, it was all volunteer. I mean, the manager got paid. Oh, let me just go back. I was going to say, to these two women, when they were the co-managers of the credit union, they got paid. But it was hard to distinguish their salary from zero. You know. Okay, so there's. So I would say that's my. Well, you know, I taught and wrote, but my involvement in politics came mostly through the credit union. There was a period when Mike was on the board of the credit union. Okay, let me. This is the 9th stop. I won't cover all the slides I've got here, but I'll just say this. In economics, there's two kinds of goods. There's consumer goods and investment goods. And consumer goods are goods that you buy because you want to consume them, like an ice cream cone. The reason people buy ice cream cones is they like ice cream cones. And then investment goods are goods that you buy because they can do something. You don't like the goods for themselves, but they'll do something that you want. Like a shovel is an investment. Nobody buys a shovel because they want to consume the shovel. They don't love shovels, but the shovel can do something for them. It can dig a ditch that they need dug. Right? So I've often had fun with students asking them, well, what is education for you? Is it an investment good or a consumer good? I mean, is it an investment good because you don't really want to be here, you don't like being here, but you're getting educated, you're getting a degree, and that will give you what is sometimes called human capital. It will give you the skills and the credentials to have a better life. So it's an investment good, right? Or is it possible that it's a consumer good, that you just love education, you just love being here, right? So I sometimes ask the students that question. And of course, for almost all of them, it's an investment good. And I said that's honorable. Although there's a wonderful book by an alumna of UCSC, Wendy Brown, who's a very distinguished political theorist, and who's just angry as hell about universities posturing themselves as investment goods, as creators of human capital. No, she says, universities are for developing the full person and developing democracy. But as far as I'm concerned, I mean, if people go to the university because they want a better life, I don't think that's dishonorable. But I would tell them that's not my story. I'll be 82 in a couple of days. I started when I was 2 in preschool. When I was 2, so I've been in school 80 years, and so how come? You know, that's rather unusual. And why did I stay here? And it's because I love it. Because really, for me, education and schooling and participating in education is wonderful. I love it. You know, and I'm not trying to impose that idea on other people, but that actually happens to be the truth for me. I think sometimes education actually transforms lives. I've got a slide about it. I won't take you to the slide, but I sometimes ask my students, or beginning teachers. You know, new cadres of teachers come to the university, and I'll have a session with them, and I'll say, so I'll ask you this question. Can you think of a teacher or a course that changed your life? I mean, not just that you liked, but that actually changed your life. And it doesn't have to be a university or graduate school. Could be kindergarten. But can you think of? So I'm going to ask you: Is there any? Can you look back, and is there any such occasion that just transformed your life? Raise your hand if you can think of such. Okay. That was question 1. Question 2. Did you tell them? Did you go back to that person? Oh, some of you did. But many fewer hands. But more than I usually get. So then I said, you know, that's the thing about teaching. That's what we're hoping in teaching, is to transform people's lives. And you won't know. So one of the things I tell them is, look, I've got advice for you. Go home tonight and write a letter to that person. And it won't be difficult because I'll dictate it to you right now. And here's the letter. Dear Miss Smith, what you taught me about reading in 3rd grade made me love books, and I've been a reader ever since. Yours sincerely. And you know what? Miss Smith has never gotten a letter like that. I can just almost guarantee it. She has never gotten a letter like that. And it will make her day, right? So why don't you do that? But then you also should know that you're not going to get very many of those letters. Not necessarily because you haven't had that effect. Maybe you have. But by and large, people don't convey that back to you. So therefore, when you design your course, when you go into class, not only the course, but each individual class, when you go into it, keep in the back of your mind that you might be changing somebody's life. And you'll never know. You probably won't even know their name. I know of 2 people, I've been teaching for like 50 years. I know of 2 people whose lives I've fundamentally changed. That's not a very high rate, right? 1 every 25 years. And I can hope that there's more than that. But I have that kind of faith that that's the, that's what's going on in our profession of teaching. Of course, there's a lot, oh my goodness. There's a lot more I could say, and I won't. So I'd just like to, let's see, your turn. Ask questions, make objections. Is your experience of UCSC different from mine? And I think Kathy here, this lecture is being recorded. It may not be of deathly interest to that many people, but
One, two, there we go.
yeah.
Young people are often, it's often difficult for us to persuade young people to get into public life, as you're talking about politics or public life. And like many other Americans, of course, not just young people, but when there seems to be a much higher percentage of young people who, when they do get into politics, find it very difficult to transition into a kind of a pragmatic politics. In other words, it tends to be apocalyptic. They want to change the world. They want to get engaged. They'll do things. They'll take risks and so forth. But it doesn't necessarily end up being particularly productive. And often that's why voting seems hard, because candidates are flawed and they're never exactly what you were hoping for. And there's those issues. What do you tell students to help them sort of think about transitioning not just into the world of politics, but into the world of politics in a way that would allow them to vote for some real candidate that could win an election and make a difference?
Mike, I'm laughing because when you asked that question, because I remember you as a young man, and you were you were one of those people that you're describing as somewhat unrealistic, and as you matured, I think you persuaded yourself that you didn't change one bit. But I think you did, and and I think that's a good place to start for young people to want to change the world. I mean, if they don't want to change the world, what are they? I don't know. I mean, I understand what you're saying, but the other side of that is that's a good place for young people to start. Who else?
I was in the pioneer class, trailers the first year, transferred to Stevenson because I was a government major, thought I wanted to go into the Foreign Service after having read The Ugly American. And we were imbued with that whole ethos about the benefit of small Oxford, Cambridge-type colleges with the resources of a major university. We were told that Herbert Hoover was in the first class at Stanford. I don't know if Dean McHenry wanted to cultivate more Herbert Hoovers. So, but I'm wondering, in respect of what you said about the tension between departments and colleges, what your sense is of where things stand today. Are the colleges just housing for the university, or is it still vital in changing people's lives?
Well, I haven't been here for 18 years, but my sense of the way things were when I left, and even when I was provost, was that the colleges were wonderful institutions in terms of student services, in terms of student community, and they had some importance in the intellectual lives of students, particularly the core course and other programs that the colleges put on. I mean, it wasn't zero, but so it's not just student housing. I mean, it's a student community and a student intellectual community. But unless things have changed in the last 18 years, they were not the center of intellectual life in the campus. The center of intellectual life in the campus was the departments. Have I got that wrong, Elizabeth?
Yeah, you've got that right.
Here's. Oh.
Okay, now I recognize you from that photograph, because I'm old as well and was here 76 to 80. And I started out in Stevenson as a politics major because I wanted to become a lawyer, because I thought that would be a well-paying job. And I realized at the time that I should probably understand economics if I wanted to get into politics, because as Bill Clinton said, it's all about the economy, stupid. And I had that life-changing class, Econ 1, just everything clicked. It made sense to me and changed my life. So I got my degree in economics. But one thing that I've been thinking about recently there's been so much negativity and less hope in the world. And it seemed to me like during our years here, when I was here, there were a lot of problems. There was pollution, there was war, there was poverty, there was inequality. But we all thought it would get better, that we could work to make things better. And what seems to be happening more recently is that we have a lot of these same problems, but that younger people don't think it's going to be better.
Yeah.
So I'm wondering what your take on that is. Is it because of financial reasons that people are more worried because they don't think they'll have jobs and afford a home, or is it just the politics of the day?
No, I think that's correct. That for generations, each generation was absolutely certain they would do better than their parents' generation, and people don't think that anymore. And one of the I could go on forever about this, but I think you're correct. One of the reasons is that the ecological problems we're much more aware of the ecological problems, so we're not even sure we're going to have a future, right? That's part of the problem. Here's another way I like to think of it. The students of the 60s and early 70s one of the things that attracted them to Santa Cruz was so adventurous, and we had the narrative evaluations, and we had the interdisciplinary programs, and all sorts of, adventurous programs, and they could take those programs because they thought they would be fun and because they were, they would be enjoyable. education as a consumer good. They just wanted those programs, and they didn't have any worries about their future lives. They never thought about that they wouldn't be able to make a living. I mean, that just didn't enter into their thinking, most of them. Now, that's not true of working class students who did have to worry about that, but the majority of students that we had didn't worry about that. These days, people do worry about that. People do worry, how am I going to be able to make a living? I'm not sure I'm going to be able to make a living. I can't take these adventurous interdisciplinary courses. Maybe I'm not learning something I should be learning. I think that's happened. Paul here has a question.
John, first of all, just thank you. This was a wonderful. This was a wonderful hour, and an hour plus, but we really appreciate your time. And I have just two observations. One, I think it's really remarkable when we get to see the arc of our lives. And you've given us an opportunity to see some of the arc of yours. And it just seems to me the most appropriate way to spend an alumni weekend like this is to look back and try to understand some of the things, the choices we've made and the choices that have been made for us. And a lot of the serendipity, whether it's having married Roz and then deciding to become a writer, or it's winding up starting a college and then realizing that your whole profession is something that you really never imagined doing. And I just urge all of us to take that moment to look back and just try to figure out what those forces that turn us into who we are, and how lucky we are that we get the time to do that as we age. The second thing is, as someone who was part of the colleges and who'd had a similar life to yours here, moving away from my department into the college for my real intellectual life, one of the things that strikes me that you didn't talk about was speech, talking, conversation. I know it was at the center of your life, but it seems to me one of the great advantages of the college system was that we were forced to talk to each other as teachers and as students, and as teachers and students who came from various different disciplines with great different demands. And I know it's a silly thing to say, but you've become a lecturer, and you didn't have that skill when you left graduate school. I'm
Right.
sure you didn't. I know you didn't.
That's right. That's right.
I can promise you didn't. And I remember he didn't, yes, even though I wasn't here. I'm a few years younger than John. But I wanted, can you speak a little bit about how you've learned to trust your voice, how you've learned to think about the conversations you've had with other people and what they've done for you?
Oh gosh, what a good question. I don't know if I can give a very good answer to it. I think I think the main clue to it is to think of the people I'm talking to as real people, and not just the sort of faceless group. When I wrote the slides for this, wrote out the slides for this talk, and I showed them to Roz, and I said, could you help me maybe make a few little tweaks on it? And Roz looked at it and said, it won't do it all, and you have forgotten who your audience is. You've forgotten who you're talking to. They're not going to be interested in this. Why don't you think about who you're talking to? So I had to go back to square one. I said, well, could you give me some, so what should I do? And she gave me a few ideas. So this talk that I gave today is partly me thinking about who you are, But partly Rod's helping me do that, helping me think who you are. That's a very limited answer to a very good question. On the first part of your observation, here's something I've often thought about, that as our lives go on, we make, every day we make decisions. We do this, we do that, and we have no idea which of those decisions are going to be life-changing and which of those decisions are just not going to be life-changing. We could turn around and make a different decision tomorrow. So clearly my decision to not go to the World Bank and come to Merrill College was, to say the least, was life-changing, but I didn't understand that. At the time, I had no idea. And I don't know if we ever do. Maybe sometimes. But, yeah, I don't know. Most of the time, I think we don't understand which of our decisions are life-changing. It's a very thoughtful set of two questions and a very brief response to them. Elizabeth.
John, I'm another person who has found my way through the colleges, and in particular through Merrill College, which I learned in part from reading your memoir, and I understood something about the history of Merrill just by knowing you. In my experience, I have found the colleges to be in lots of ways more idealistic than the rest of the institution. And I guess I have the question, actually in some cases more idealistic than the students we expect to be idealistic. My question is, how do we maintain, how do we keep the institution invested in these micro-institutions that keep the flame alive? I think in my time, I've seen the colleges go up and also sink down again, and I'm a little worried.
Yeah. Well, me too. I don't know that I have any. In the early days, we hired faculty in part because of how they would fit with the colleges. We, of course, no longer do that at all. The departments hire faculty, and then it's sort of random whether they have any interest in the college at all. In my department, you know, we re-aggravated into Crown College, and then, but we were still in the college. And they had some connection to the college, and then we went through several colleges and ended up in the engineering building. So the economic people are hired as economists. They have no connection to the college. I mean, they may be a member of a college, but they have no connection to it whatsoever. I don't know. I think it's you know, the future is in the hands of people like you who maintain that flame. There are a few people who do.
It's politics.
So, yes.
I'd sort of like to speak to that. I was Kresge 76. My daughter was college, well, John Lewis 2023. And my experience, when you talked about having students in your living room, my experience was some of my classes were me, a professor, 8 other kids, and my dog under the table. And my dog actually was featured on some of the finals. My daughter's experience was 200 kids in a lecture hall. She really never knew her professors. She never went to any professors' homes. So if you want to know why the kids aren't connected to the college, there's none of the personal experiences that we had.
Yeah. You know, what I worry about in this conversation, and I've been guilty of it more than you, and it's the standard thing of, you know, at alumni gatherings or, you know, old farts like me sort of remembering what the past was like. The past was golden, and it's been downhill ever since, right? And well, maybe it has been, but the truth is the past was what it was, and the present and the future are different from the past. They're not necessarily worse, and we have to catch ourselves. I mean, you know, your experience of getting to know faculty members and small groups and stuff, and that the students don't have now, yeah, that's worse. But it's not necessarily the case that the overall experience is worse. And we have to be careful about sort of reifying our own past to be the standard from which we judge everything else. I worry about this. I remember we had, what's the public health, Lori, Lori Garrett, a Merrill alumna who went on to have a very fine career as a public health journalist, very influential, and she won Pulitzer Prizes. And we brought her back to talk here for a week, and it was quite wonderful. And she has been in the forefront of social change, you know, health change, and a very dynamic career. And her message to us was, don't change a thing. Don't change anything. You know, she wants the UCSC that she went to be there forever. And of course, that's impossible. It is going to change. Somebody got him. Okay, there's someone down here afterwards. So, yeah.
Regarding sort of the discussion of how the colleges have been sort of de-emphasized and departments re-emphasized, do you think that that's a sort of symptom of a larger sort of refactoring towards education as an investment good rather than a consumer good, as to what you were talking about before? That we are now seeing education more as sort of a factory in order to get people into pre-existing systems rather than as a way to, you know, sort of engage in a larger picture? And if that's kind of like, you know, where we're going through maybe economic incentives, is there like sort of a way to sort of find ways to refactor it back into something that's more for personal development, and like what incentives would be possible in order to sort of you know, make a future where education is seen more as something that is taken for personal development rather than necessarily a career path, given that, you know, we were talking about young people and their hopes or lack thereof for the future economically. Most people seem to go into it understandably in order to find a career. And is it, you know, can we take the fact that maybe we don't have so much hope for careers as a way as, well, you might as well take it as a consumer good and find a way to sort of find yourself in it? Or I guess, so do you think there is a way to sort of incentivize that in the future?
It's a very complicated question, and you know, a fully adequate answer to it would be very complicated too. I'll just give as with my responses to all these questions, a very brief one. This is a public institution. I think public institutions are responsive to the public. And UCSC, which began in the 1960s, was responsive to what people wanted. This was the most popular campus in the whole UC system because it had all those features you talked about. And UCSC responded to that. And it changed, I think, because the public changed, because students wanted something different, because faculty wanted something different. And I think it'll change in the future. I don't think this is fixed in stone. What the public wants is going to change, and our institution will change with it in ways that I can hardly predict. I'm sure there's much better answers to what you're saying than that. Yeah, Shelley.
I'll turn slightly so that I'm not just addressing John. I came here in 1972 and I retired in 2015. So I was here for a long time, not the founding mother. But I had a conversation 2 days ago with a friend who is a retired professor at Berkeley. His grandson is going to Santa Cruz now. I was so touched because this young man is now going to be a junior, and when he first came, he and his girlfriend were going to go to UCLA because of whatever their dissatisfactions were. Now he's discovered himself in the history department, and he says, he reported this to his grandfather, that it's so exciting, it's so inspiring the way that it's taught, because it's not just facts and whatever it is that he learned in high school, but that it has anthropology and it has literature and it has all kinds of things, and he's interested in international history, and he's just found himself. I was so touched because I also, I was here early and I liked the college system and I liked all of these things, and I also was in opposition to the administration for a good part of my career here. It's I think the radical middle. I was in the Senate and the Faculty Association and so forth. And keeping on trying to keep it from falling off the cliff into all of the terrible things. But I always felt that the faculty who were attracted here, for reasons that I've never understood, there's the weather, but I think the reputation plus the people who are hiring them hires people who actually are interested in interdisciplinary things. I think that it's an uphill battle to do that, but I was just very pleased to hear that he found it inspiring and interdisciplinary, and so I felt hopeful.
See, that's wonderful, right? And so the institution is different from what it was 50 years ago, but it's still a wonderful institution.
I'm not going to tell you the slides were all wrong. They were great, and thank you for that and your kind mentions. What I wanted to say, I'm lucky enough to be able to teach the summer session at UCSC, even though I nominally retired in 2006 and ostensibly teach in Toronto. But it is always such a joy to see UCSC students, even online, which is how I see them. And they are they are very, very stressed, I have to say. Economically, medically, some of them under huge family pressure to succeed and take care of their families at the same time. When I think of all of us in 1968 who fled our families and didn't carry those responsibilities and perhaps should have, it's profound what they deal with, and I think that's a barrier to some of the education I would love them to have. On the other hand, the spark is all there. They're pretty remarkable. The other thing is that I'm lucky enough, to the good graces of Susan Watrous, to occasionally have contact with City on a Hill Press, which is an absolute hotbed of energy and insight and extraordinary work. And and occasionally with the student literary magazines through my class. But when I think about what's, we're sort of polarizing it with the colleges vis-a-vis the departments. And I don't think that's what it looks like anymore. I guess that's what I'm trying to say, which is that the colleges, of course, have these partnerships through other institutions, like the education that you carried on, the education projects from Merrill. The departments have some of those, like Leslie Lopez's Corre la Voz, has worked so long with Bayview School. And, student media, Sameka, all the really remarkable student organizations that are, where students are with a certain amount of guidance, educating themselves, and indeed engaging in politics, and indeed transforming themselves and each other and the world. So I guess I would say that there are very, very hopeful pockets here at UCSC, which I just get to glimpse. And whether the colleges are ascendant or not, and one always hopes they will be, and through the people's hard work, they tend to be. Still, there is so much going on among undergraduates that's breathtaking, and that I don't see actually at the University of Toronto, where they're working very, very hard. They're doing extraordinary work there, but they're in their professors' labs. They're doing internships in business, and they're taking care of their families. But there's not this sort of student-initiated organizational fire that I see here even now.
Are you going to respond, or we'll just go to the next?
No, I wouldn't dare.
So my name is Terry Burke, and John and I go all the way back to the beginning, and the beginning even before we were on stage here, because we both got PhDs from Princeton and were interviewed in the dining room at Princeton by Phil Bell, the founding provost of Merrill, who had about 4 months to put his team on the field when the previous provost who had been named decided, oh dear, this is sounding a little scary to me. I don't think I want to go to Santa Cruz and run a college. So anyway, I just had some random thoughts. But so one of them is these debates that were so turning point in Merrill. I don't think I was in the '60s. I seem to have missed it completely. So Hegel versus Marx, really? Was that happening? Gee, I missed that totally. Maybe it has to do with being an historian and not an intellectual historian. Could be it has something to do with that. So John and I had, pause. So the next one is my favorite teachers, right? So I had two favorite teachers. One of them was a teacher in grade school. I was very privileged in the end to have gone to a tiny little one-room school on Long Island, which is hard to imagine such a thing could even exist. Where there were 22 kids in the entire school, grades K through 6. Right? And Irma Tuttle was the woman who presided over this whole thing. And we would take turns teaching. As you got along in the grades, you would help teach, or if you were deemed apt by her, you would teach the kids in the lower grades, because she had to keep moving around from one grade to another and just keeping the thing going, right? So it was quite amazing. So periodically I would get library time, and I was just so amazed by that, and I discovered the Greeks and the Romans and mythology and all that as a result. So that's one favorite teacher. The other one is Emil T. Hoffman, who probably ranks right up there as well. He was a professor of chemistry who almost flunked me in freshman chemistry. It was the flunk-out class, as we learned more cynically to call these things later on. But his job was to do meltdown, and I got 18 out of on a midterm, the total score of which was 100, and immediately fled to the humanities and to history, and have never looked back, and graduated with magna cum laude in my major. So anyway, I went in search of him on graduation day and thanked him for because he saved my life, right? So there's that, right? So you never know who your favorite teacher is going to be, right? And he was a great teacher, by the way, but it's just that I was playing cards when I should have been doing something else. All right, so then UCSC today. So there are two things I want to say. So one of them has to do with being next door to John all these years and discovering just how important social demography is to thinking about the world. So if there's a single skill that is so important that everybody needs to have it, I think it's social demography. So just as a for instance, so I am a retired teacher of Middle East history, and the way I teach Middle East history, especially today, would be to say, look, the Israel that used to be is no more. 1/3 of the population, of the Jewish population of Israel, are either ultra-Orthodox or Orthodox, and they are divided into all sorts of different clubs. And then there's the ones who are not religious, who are, from an outsider's point of view, fascist, right, who are doing grievous things in the West Bank right now, turning out farmers from their fields and burning them down and all that kind of thing. All right, so if you have a handle on demography, and you can understand a lot of the dynamics, who has 2 passports and who does not, as in Israel, right? That's another thing to think about, right? And what is that other passport? Where does that take you? Is it who doesn't have passports? Who is of third world Jewish origin, right? Where does the elevator stop for them? So it's imagining the future, thinking about poor Palestine, right? So whatever happens with what's teetering on the brink right now, and thank God for historians, we don't have the ability to see the future, because it would drive us crazy because we keep thinking we're seeing it and it's not happening, right? We don't know what's going to drive it, but for sure what's going to drive what goes after that is going to be social demography. And so thank you, John, for a wonderful lecture, first of all, but for also having come back to your first love, which betrayed you, and which now you have found ways of putting back into play. Right, so that's maybe the third thing. And so the final one, just to keep it really brief, is there's lots of wonderful things going on here. I retired in 2018, and I still hover around here. I'm in Dominican Oaks, which is the senior residence just adjacent to Dominican Hospital, or what used to be called Dominican Hospital over here. And at table, I meet people, one of whom I just met the other day as a new person, who had a career in the sort of middle-high ranks in Silicon Valley, and he was a brilliant engineer. What did he study as an undergraduate? History. He had a website. He still has the website, I think, but this particular part of the website somehow was taken down, and he didn't have anything to do with it. But it's who are the heads of all of the major Silicon Valley firms whose names we know, right? And what did they study before they went off to run the world, right? And he had a picture of them and their the firm they represent, and then you pushed a button, it would flip over, and it would say what their major was. So classics, history, literature, psychology, whatever, right? So it's quite amazing. So I've had conversations here ongoing with various people who are still active faculty and who push the notion that if you want to succeed in Silicon Valley, by all means, if you feel just to get street cred, you might want to have some knowledge of what goes on, but get yourself a degree which includes the humanities and social sciences and arguments and discussions, right? So I think that talking is the point about talking is so important. Learning how to organize things. Where does that happen? That's not going to happen in the stat lab, right? So anyway, so it's lots of wonderful things are happening here at UCSC. They're not necessarily happening in colleges. The divisions seem to be playing a bigger role now. Just look at the website. If you haven't looked at the website recently, and look at the transformations that it has taken on. And it's just breathtaking. It's just so many different mashups of things. Departments have been melting down as well as colleges, right? And then reinventing themselves, and sometimes in funny coordinations with others that you would never imagine would even come about. So arts and history and literature and so on all sort of coming together in ways that are just dazzling. So lots of great stuff is still going on here. The colleges need to be more part of that. And so how to bring that about, I don't have the wit to be able to say, but it seems to me that that would be a great place for that to start happening. And then finally, those cell phones, right? So between the population of the Earth, which hurtles now towards 10 million, and the numbers of cell phone owners, which is traveling not very far behind, it divides us all up into little bits. And so learning how to talk face to people, learning how to sit, just all the things that were basic skills back in the day when there were just fewer of us around, that was the way you had to do it. We need to find ways of intercepting and intervening so that people develop life skills in talking to people who they disagree with fundamentally on many points. All right, thanks. I've more than had my time, but thanks so much, John.
Okay, I think it's noon, and we were scheduled for 10 to noon. So I think we'll end there. So I just got a few more words to say. Anybody who wants to come up to John Lewis College and have lunch, we can continue these discussions. Thank you all for coming. I've got one more slide, which I am not going to read, but it'll be up there. You can read it.